Welcome to the show, where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today in the show, we have Eric Feigl-Ding. He is an epidemiologist and health economist, and he's a senior fellow at the Federation of American Scientists. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Can you briefly share your story and journey to where you are today?
I think it's relevant that I was originally born in China and I came to America when I was 5 years old. Grew up all American, went to Johns Hopkins for my undergrad in public health. And then I went straight to my doctoral program in epidemiology at Harvard School of Public Health. Along the way, I picked up another doctorate in nutrition as well, but that's a story for another day. And then I also started medical school, BU Medical School, while I was a postdoc at Harvard School of Public Health. And then eventually became faculty at Harvard Medical School that forced me to drop out of medical school. So that's my brief academic career. But I've done a lot of academia research. I've done a lot of clinical trials, global health projects, and have a lot of colleagues at WHO and other health agencies worldwide. And when this pandemic first emerged in January of 2020, I was really worried about it, but back then people were still talking about, do we need to wear masks? Do we, the early days of the pandemic, as I like to say. But I was incredibly worried, and I realized that, slow action was really endangering the world because, the failure to act and failure to move is the greatest error of pandemic management. So I try to warn the world with my Holy Mother of God warning. And yeah, the world's kind of played out in the worst possible scenarios. We're in the wrong timeline, as you could say. So I've been trying to keep the world updated on COVID, and as well as running a few other global health projects, running a trial on COVID that's finishing up soon in Mexico, and working with WHO and global leaders, trying to really help people digest, process, and act faster. So, and I have no idea why I'm still here after all these months. This should have been over by year one or year 1.5, but here we are, going into year 2 pretty soon. And now we have the Omicron variant. That's, new variant of concern that literally popped up. I would say like before Thanksgiving, no one's even heard of B11529, which today just got its Omicron name. But now it's shaking the world markets and really shaking how people live their lives within a span of literally 2 days. I think that the world has changed because of it. The variant is, I would say, it keeps me up at night a little bit because obviously it has a lot of mutations. And some of the speculation so far has been, it has a lot of bad mutations. It has 32 mutations in its spike protein. Contrast that with Delta, which has 13, I think, mutations. So this is a lot more mutations, but it's not just the mutations. Like that's just in terms of biological plausibility that it could be bad. It's plausible that it could be more evasive against immunity, against not just vaccines, but potentially reinfection. And that's actually what the WHO's warning today about Omicron was, that it has reinfection potential, but it's also potentially higher infectiousness. And severity, we don't know. But what really worries me is seeing the signals line up in the wrong way. And by that, I mean, it surged in South Africa. Again, it first started in Botswana, but it surged in South Africa, but it's not just in one part of South Africa. It surged across 6 different provinces in South Africa all at once. And, normally if it was a random surge in one spot, we could say maybe we did some over-testing. But no, this is across the board, across almost all provinces in South Africa. The positivity went from 1% to 30%. And in terms of the cases identified in one region, it's basically been 75% Omicron. It's been displacing Delta. And we have not seen a variant that's been successful in displacing Delta as a dominant variant anywhere in the world up until now. And the fact that it quickly displaced Delta is incredibly worrisome. Some models, early models based on the early data, says it has 500% infection advantage versus the original Wuhan while Delta has about 2x. Now, I hope to God that early data is wrong, but whether it's 500% or 300% or 200%, that is still incredibly worrisome in terms of its infectiousness speed. And we should take the precautionary principle. And that's always been kind of like my philosophy that, when in doubt of certainty, lean towards what will save more lives and lean towards containing this virus as quickly as possible rather than let it spread and wait and see and to collect the data of how infectious and severe it is. And then realizing after the fact, oops, it was really bad, but oops, we didn't act until now while waiting for a significant p-value, and then the world is endangered again. So I think that taking the precautionary principle is really, really the best philosophy here, and especially in the face of all these worrisome data. And the worrisome data is that, in Hong Kong, they caught 2 cases only by extreme amount of quarantine and PCR testing. They found 1 case after 2 PCR tests, 1 case after 8 days, and 4 PCR tests that have finally turned positive on the 4th test. And both of those Hong Kong cases were fully vaccinated with Pfizer, albeit they were 6-month-old Pfizer vaccinated individuals. They didn't do boosters yet. Israel case was also vaccinated, but the most worrisome is the Belgium case. That young woman, she wasn't vaccinated, but she never traveled to sub-Saharan Africa. She had just returned from Egypt via Turkey. Neither of them are sub-Saharan Africa or even close remotely in distance to South Africa in any way, but yet there she caught it. So, which means that the Omicron is already out of Southern Africa. It's already spreading around the world, and we are just playing catch up. Like, for example, the Hong Kong cases, the first case had traveled out of South Africa on November 11th carrying the virus. We're on November 26th, 27th as we're recording this now. So the virus has had a good 2 weeks to already spread around the world. And that's what makes us worry. Like, just before our call, Netherlands has quarantined 2 flights from Cape Town and Joburg, carrying 600 people, and they've tested 100 people so far and already found 15 cases of COVID. They're still trying to confirm whether it's Omicron, but it's highly likely that they'll find a couple dozen cases. And among them, I bet half of them are likely Omicron at this point, given that Omicron is 75% in certain provinces, like in South Africa. So it's already cat's out of the bag. Travel restrictions are good only to a certain degree if you can pinpoint where they are. But if it's already left Southern Africa, like the Belgian case has already shown, I think what we need more than travel restrictions is quarantine upon international arrivals in the United States or any other country where the government should quarantine international arrivees and test them. Whether they quarantine at home or hotel, they have to stay quarantined and have enforcement around that and tested throughout quarantine. Because only with testing throughout quarantine can we find the cases, as Hong Kong has just taught us. So we have to take a really radical different approach if we want to keep this Omicron variant contained.
How are these first few days of the Omicron variant, how do they contrast with the first few days of the Delta variant?
Well, the first few days of the Delta variant is very different because Delta emerged in India, in rural India. And then, of course, India does not have good testing. I equate India to Botswana because Omicron originally, B11529, originally started in Botswana, we think. That's where it's first identified. But they don't have good testing there. It wasn't identified until tracing from South Africa retroactively found it. But, India Delta spread for like a month or 2 before it actually hit the world stage. So people say, well, look, Delta, it was already spreading for 2 months. Yeah, but the thing is, the critical point was when, remember back in the spring, April, May, June, in April when Delta really was causing a calamity in New Delhi, and then international travel brought it further around the world. It was those early days, had there been action, we could have contained it. But by then, we had no international arrival containment. Like, people were flying from India to Toronto airport and walking off the airplane without any testing or quarantine whatsoever. And many countries did that, and hence it spread around the world. I think we need to learn from that lesson that you can't just, if there's a flight from an epicenter, travel bans is one thing, but again, I don't think, given what we've seen, just restricting to Southern Africa flights is enough. We need to test all international arrivals. That is what we really have to do. And that's, I think, our lesson from Delta, that unless you do that international arrival testing, at least, at minimum, upon arrival testing and upon arrival repeat testing, like several days after your arrival, that would really catch a lot of cases that we miss just due to the nature of the incubation period, taking a few days to build up. So I think that is the lesson we should learn, and screwing around and delaying and sitting on our hands, waiting for the right data from your own government before you act, I think is really, really a lesson that we should soak in and act quickly for this Omicron.
You mentioned that the cases in Hong Kong were in fully vaccinated individuals,
Right.
albeit 6+ months. What do we know about the infections in South Africa? Were they primarily also in fully vaccinated patients?
Many of them are not vaccinated. I remember reading, I don't have the exact number, I just remember reading the majority of the cases in South Africa, and we're up to several hundred now, were unvaccinated. Granted, so South Africa, I think Botswana could definitely use more vaccine. South Africa is not supply blocked. It's vaccine hesitancy blocked. So, a lot of, just like in the United States or many other countries, there's a lot of vaccine hesitancy, and that's where blocking the uptake. But I think we can't quite elucidate whether it's evasive. But every vaccinologist and immunologist I've talked to, they believe that it will be evasive. And again, I think the best word is that it's evasive, not escape. Like some people say vaccine escape, which to some lay public, people think that, efficacy goes down to 0. I think it's more like, there's going to be like 10 or 20% hit to the efficacy. But I think the efficacy against hospitalizations is still going to be good. We've seen hospitalization efficacy not really wane that much, only like 5% over 6 months. It's the infection efficacy that really drops from a combination of waning as well as Delta. Delta is probably a quarter of the efficacy drop that we've seen due to that, while the 3 other quarters of the total drop from, say, 95% to 50% that we see against infection now is due to the actual waning. But I think boosters will be good, because boosters don't just restore your antibody levels to a fresh 2-dose. Like from 0 to fresh 2-dose, you get about for Pfizer, 700 antibody levels. Mm-hmm. And over 6 months, you drop to about 300 to 400. But a booster at 6 months boosts you not back up to 700, but up to 2,000, like 2,000, 2,500. So that is a much higher level, orders of magnitude level higher in terms of efficacy or antibody levels, and therefore efficacy. And that's why we've seen that the actual infection protection is about 80% against like 3 doses versus 2 doses. Now, 3 doses versus 0 doses, it's even higher. It's like 95% or so. But against 2 doses, you're still seeing 80, 90% improvement in efficacy and really high hospitalization improvement efficacy over 95%. So I think 3 doses we should really reclassify the 3rd dose not as a booster, which a booster makes it sound like it's optional. It's kind of if you need it, but boosters, I think, are really, really key because it triples the antibody levels from your fresh 2-dose, right? I think we should adopt Israel's philosophy that you're not fully vaxxed until you're 3-dose vax. And UK is starting to adopt that. A few other countries started adopting that. US should adopt that soon, that, if you're 2-dose and more than 6 months, or even more than 4 months out, because efficacy starts dropping pretty sharply even after 4 months. If you're more than 4 months out or 6 months out, you should be classified as only partially vaccinated with just 2 doses. We need a 3rd dose. And, how long will that last? I don't know, but a lot of immunologists say at least 9 months, if not over a year, we should be good, given that you're no longer at 700, but over 2,000. But we really need to reclassify fully vaccinated for the sake of international travel, fully vaccinated travelers, as well as vaccine passports and other safety precautions that require fully vaccinated people.
When can we expect the data to come out articulating the efficacy of the current vaccines?
Well, I think they're first going to do laboratory studies. So in laboratory studies, the first fast way is to look at pseudovirus neutralization. So they're going to create a pseudovirus in a lab, and then they're going to run it. They're already doing these experiments right now in South Africa and elsewhere. They're going to run it against either convalescent plasma, against people who've convalescent serum, people who previously recovered, or against vaccinated serum. And again, I think now compared to before, they're going to really classify versus fully vaccinated or recently 2-dose vaccinated sera. And then they're going to look at the neutralization reductions of this virus versus an older strain, like, for example, Delta or Beta or Alpha or the Wuhan 1.0. And then you're going to look at how much relative fold drop in neutralization there is against Omicron versus against those other. So they'll have a head-to-head comparison in these pseudovirus laboratory experiments against vaccinated or convalescent blood samples.
You wrote in one of your tweets that I found was very interesting, and you wrote, maybe this variant is Mother Nature's revenge on humanity for not helping Africa enough with vaccines. Tell us what you meant by that.
Yeah, it was late at night. I couldn't sleep, and I was just really frustrated. Obviously, vaccine equity, as we know, is a serious problem because wealthy countries have an overabundance that we can't even use them all, and they're expiring. But sub-Saharan Africa, among poor countries, you have high, upper middle, and lower income countries. These lower income countries, the percentage of them that's been fully vaccinated is incredibly low. Almost none have been fully vaccinated. And the vaccinations that they have done so far is very, very slow because they can't afford to purchase on the world market. They only rely on COVAX donations. And COVAX, the problem with COVAX is that it's mostly based on donations and fire sale pricing. So basically, for example, if the world demand for vaccines goes up again due to boosters, this is why WHO has been against boosters, which I don't think is the best policy, given we know that boosters are really important for protection, for hospitalization as well as infection. The issue is that when there's a high demand and insufficient supply, what happens is that pharma companies stop donating to COVAX. Mm-hmm. They basically, if they have someone who they could sell for money at full price, they would rather do that than sell or fire sale at a heavily discounted price to COVAX. And a lot of these lower income countries, they're kind of like tranches, right? The COVAX donation mechanism is the lowest tranche, in which once there's an excess and then these vaccine companies can't sell all of them at the full price world market, then it goes to COVAX and then it goes to the poor countries. And my point about this is that a lot of these sub-Saharan African countries have not gotten enough, obviously. And sub-Saharan Africa is oftentimes a breeding ground for a lot of variants because of HIV. One of the first cases, I think the first case in Botswana that was identified was in an HIV positive person. And one thing we know about what drives variants is not just the total number of warm bodies that the virus has, it's immunocompromised people. Immunocompromised people, we've seen it time and time again. We have MGH, Massachusetts General Hospital, a New England Journal case of someone with immunocompromise, and the virus literally went through several generations in a person's body and hypermutated by the time this person died many months later. But we know immunocompromised individuals are like a breeding ground because they can't fully extinguish the virus with their own immune system. And so creates several selection waves for the virus to perfect itself in terms of evasiveness and infectiousness. And I think Sub-Saharan Africa has a lot of HIV, as you know, and that creates a perfect breeding ground among the immunocompromised. And that's been a lot of the worry of why Africa has been. So it's kind of like a double whammy because we kind of neglected HIV as well as neglected COVID vaccines for Sub-Saharan Africa. That we have this perfect breeding ground because we haven't really mitigated or squashed this virus as much as we could. And here is the fruit of our bad karma. And hence, my analogy was Mother Nature trying to exact its revenge because humanity has neglected Sub-Saharan Africa in many ways. And that's the ultimate irony and sadness of all of this.
We're talking to Eric Feigl-Ding. He is a health economist and epidemiologist, and he is a senior fellow at the Federation of American Scientists. Eric, you've been following this pandemic very closely from the beginning. Now, given the Omicron variant, what do you think is our best case and worst case scenario?
The best case scenario, look, I think there is no fate but what we make. There are so many divergent scenarios. In the perfect world, we would squash it as quickly as we can, vaccinate the hell out of the world so we can really create a really high seawall. I like to use a seawall thing because right now we're giving the virus speed bumps or earthen dams against these waves. Like on a good day, we can hold back against it with our vaccines and our laissez-faire, half serious mitigations around mask wearing and ventilation and testing and contact tracing, which we don't really do that well anymore, or do that well, period, in the US. On a good day, we can hold it back. But when the waves come, like the winter wave that's already coming, it's already hitting northern US states and obviously hitting Europe, it's not enough. And you have to add other mitigations, multi-layer mitigations. Some people call it the Swiss cheese model, where you have to layer all of them together in order to stop the virus. And I think that is the best approach. But we're not doing that enough. This is a pandemic of not just a virus, but pandemic of failed leadership during a virus, pandemic. Because, I think many people, I think the best analogy is, what people ask, what is causing this? I think causality is very tricky because, take someone who has a heart attack. What caused it? Was it because the ambulance came too late? Was it because they didn't take their cholesterol medication to prevent their heart attack? Or was it, they couldn't afford the cholesterol medication? Was it, or they couldn't afford to see a doctor? Or they couldn't afford good health insurance? Like all that causal chain that led them to have their heart attack and die. I would say the virus is only one part of the chain. The lack of good pandemic response and mitigation and aggressiveness against the virus has been the other. Because many governments are pursuing this, let us spread, let's go for natural herd immunity. To some degree, yes, if you infect everyone, eventually cases will go down. I call it the burn through. And just like in a forest, eventually a forest fire will end when it burns all available brush, right? But that is not the price, that is not the pathway we should use to extinguish a wildfire or a pandemic. Letting it burn through it's not just deaths and hospitalizations, it's also long COVID. Long COVID is neurological as well as subclinical, like for example, kidney damage from reduced glomerular filtration rate. That's subclinical. It doesn't always lead to end-stage renal, but it will have domino effects for many, many years that you don't see yet. I think that long COVID thing has been completely neglected by a lot of people. Say, well, cases are down, hospitals, you know what, infection's okay, cases, it's okay as long as they don't go in the hospital, it's fine. It's not fine, because, I also want to remind people that, there was a study in Britain of 80,000 people, 15,000 with COVID, and among those ventilated in the hospital, they lost 7 IQ points equivalent. Among hospitalized but not ventilated, they lost about 5 IQ points equivalent. But even if you were never hospitalized, but you had symptoms, you lost anywhere from 1 to 4, 3 or 4 IQ points. That is actually a lot, considering that lead poisoning in children is about 2 points. And we as a society do not accept lead poisoning in children as an acceptable, tolerable, consequence of leaded water, right? But yet we're doing that and allowing that with COVID as it burns through our population. And it's incredibly tragic. And I think in many ways, look, people were kind of really shocked by the AIM market crash today, as well as the travel bans and this disruption of their holiday weekends here in the US. Like, this should be my shopping day. Why am I dealing with this stupid virus kind of thing, right? But, if you want the peace of mind of not having to deal with COVID, the best way is to eliminate COVID as much as you can. And is it possible? Yes. Israel is not an island. It is not a dictatorship. It does not ban international travel for most part, until recently against Africa. But Israel has 4 days of zero COVID deaths and very, very low infections because it took a very aggressive approach. Again, you're not fully vaxxed until you're 3-dose vaxxed for all adults. And if we took only an aggressive approach, it's like short-term pain for long-term gain.
Mhm.
Right now, a lot of governments are kind of like, managing a pandemic by kind of like companies who only care about short-term quarterly earnings, but they don't care about long-term stability of a company. Many governments are kind of like gaming for short-term political wins as opposed to long-term stability of their economy and long-term stability of the society against disruption. And I think the best way for that is not relying on natural infection or focused infection, as some people call it, many euphemisms, but really with vaccination plus other multi-layers of other MPI, non-pharmaceutical interventions, that will bring the case down. And once you're down, don't let up, just go lower, as opposed to, releasing everything. And then it's kind of like if you have high cholesterol, diabetes, but then you go on a vegan diet for 1 month, but then after that month is over, you return to what you were doing with bacon and sausages before, then you haven't solved the underlying crisis that led to that in the first place, and things are going to revert, and it's going to spiral out of control eventually again. And I also want to remind people that reinfection is incredibly, incredibly serious. That's after 180 days, 6 months of after you're previously infected, there's waning for protection against reinfection as well. It's just like vaccines have breakthroughs. Reinfection is serious among those who previously got infected, and we should not rely on a natural infection-based strategy to stop the next wave. I think that is very stupid, and that is also, very short-term, and it's expedient. It's very convenient to just let the virus burn, but long-term we'll really suffer many cycles of this up and down roller coaster, and no one wants these roller coasters anymore. So I think mitigation, multi-layered, and trying to go for as low as possible is the best approach.
And my final question, Eric, what are your take-home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
Take-home message. I think the take-home message is what I summarized in terms of we have to rely on more than just 2 doses of a shot. We need a booster, but we also need ventilation and on top of masks, and not just cloth masks, but premium masks, KN95, KF94, FFP2 masks. And ventilation, in addition to mask mandates and vaccine mandates or vaccine passport, I think what's even more important is ventilation standards in your schools and office buildings, that you should have HEPA filters in addition to opening the windows. We should have upper air UV to disinfect the air if you can't open the windows or you can't install enough HEPA filters. I think we should have a lot of indoor air quality. I think indoor air quality for this airborne virus is really, really really, really important to really change how we manage the virus going forward. And all that together will allow us to stay safe, keep our kids in school, and not deal with crushing waves and potentially crushing new variants that will pop up. And of course, really, really vaccinate as quickly as you can, and really avoid infection. Also relying on your own feeling of invulnerability because you were vaccinated or you were previously infected is not a good strategy. You should still take as many measures to protect you and your family, not just rely on the feeling of invulnerability because you were previously infected or previously vaccinated with 2 shots. Go for more protection. I think that is always the best. Precautionary principle, it will win the day if we adopt.
And how can people reach you?
Well, they can find me on Twitter, I guess. I leave my DMs open. I can't answer everything, but my Twitter is Dr. D-R-E-R-I-C, Eric Ding, D-I-N-G, D-R-E-R-I-C, D-I-N-G. You can also send me some messages on my online forums, but you can also, follow me on Substack, drericding.substack.com. But I think, look, just engage, and I think, reach out if you have a very, very, interesting data you want to share. And I oftentimes share a lot of data of readers and people who reach out to me, because I think the world needs to know. I think a lot of some of the best data comes from people from far-flung places who don't necessarily have a voice, and I want to give voice to those who are voiceless in fighting this pandemic. So stay strong, and we're in this together.
Eric, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. Thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks, Kevin. Take care. Stay safe.